Welcome to the Reel to Reel movie review. I'm Dean Val here with Dean Kevin and Peter. Today's movie is 1997 Wag the Dog. Now, let me go and do the synopsis here too before we start the comments. And again, this is 1997. And starring Robert De Niro, Dustin Hoffman, and a lot of other faces we're familiar with.
And music by Mark Knopfler too. That's
That's right.
Big plus.
Yeah, big,
Really good.
Barry Levinson, director. Okay, here we go. Synopsis. The movie starts with a scandal at the White House. Wow, that's different. Okay, where the unseen and nameless, the President of the United States is accused of fondling a young Girl Scout visiting the Oval Office just a few weeks before Election Day. Being the third-party observers, we know the truth. He's guilty. Conrad Breen, played by Robert De Niro, a notorious political spin doctor, is called to a secret midnight meeting at the White House underground command bunker by Winfred Ames, played by Anne Heche, one of the president's many advisors, where she asks for the help to engineer a way and means to divert the news of the scandal when it breaks in the newspapers the next day. Breen suggests creating an artificial war for television only to distract the American public and let the president get on with the job at hand, thus protecting the free world. Breen and Arness fly to Hollywood, where Conrad hires brash Hollywood producer Stanley Motz, played by Dustin Hoffman, whom worked for Conrad several times in the past to help fabricate this non-existent war with the selected country of Albania, to divert the public with the real news about the president's extramarital trysts. Motz is glad to help out of the blind loyalty to service for his country. At an all-night gathering at Moss's Hollywood home, he assembles a team of loyal specialists whom include creative consultant Liz Butsky, Andrea Martin, country western singer Johnny Dean, played by Willie Nelson, and entrepreneur Thad King, played by Dennis Leary, to help and fabricate the means for the war with Albania. The next day, Motz and Breen venture to a studio back lot that Motz rents out, where he hires a young up-and-coming actress named Tracy Lime, played by Kirsten Dunst, to play an Albanian peasant girl carrying a CGI cat through the green screen setup of a destroyed Albanian village. The film scene makes that evening news and brings up public interest in the war. However, the very next day, Breen and Arness are riding in a limo when they're pulled over and detained by CIA agents led by Charles Young, William Macy, who confronts them with fabricating the non-existent war with Albania. Breen manages to talk the CIA agents to releasing them by insinuating that the CIA knows little about what really is going on with the world behind the scenes. Breen convinces Young that revealing the deception is against his and the CIA's best interests. By the way, there's a line in there where De Niro says, "What do you mean it's not true, the war?" He's referring to, I saw it on TV. And I think that's where much of the public is right now. If it's on TV, it must be true. So Mr. Young releases them, but the next day, the CIA, in collusion with the president's rival candidate, leaks the story about the war in Albania being over and focusing the attention back on the president. Everyone is upset, but Motz downplays the setback by declaring, "This is nothing." The start of a running joke that gets increasingly hilarious as the movie progresses, and proposes in Act 2 to spin another fabricated story about a secret American unit stuck behind enemy lines and the missing in action story about a fellow American left behind in Albania. Motz decides to invent a hero who was left behind enemy lines in Albania. Inspired by the idea that he was discarded like an old shoe, Breen and Moses have the Pentagon provide the team with a soldier named Schumann, around whom a POW narrative is constructed, complete with t-shirts, patriotic songs, and faux grassroots demonstrations of patriotism and solidarity. As part of the hoax, Johnny Dean records a song called Old Shoe, which is pressed onto a 78 RPM record, prematurely aged so the listeners will think it was recorded years earlier, and sent to the Library of Congress to be found soon. Large numbers of old parts of shoes begin appearing on phone and power lines, signs that the movement is taking hold. However, more setbacks occur when Motz and Breen suggest bringing in a candidate to impersonate their non-existent war hero as an image to the public. That at a secret midnight meeting on an airport runway, the military police arrive where they agreed to release a dangerous mental patient who once served in the military because he has the same last name, Shu, to portray the war hero of the conflict. The military release Sergeant William This Old Shoes Schumann, played by Woody Harrelson, into their custody as Motz and Breen and Ames fly away in a private plane through a raging thunderstorm towards Washington, D.C. to welcome Old Shoe back from Albania. However, the plane crashes off camera, killing the pilots and stranding Motz and Breen and Ames along with the deranged Schumann in a rural part of South Dakota. "This is nothing," Motz quotes yet again. The four of them are forced to hitch a ride on a tractor from a passing farmer to a gas station to call for help. It is there when Schumann attempts to sexually assault the wife of the gas station owner, which results in him getting shot dead in self-defense by the owner. Despite the latest setback, Motz again relates his quote, "This is nothing." The trio return to Washington and they have the dead Schumann buried in Arlington National Cemetery as a war hero, killed in a plane crash, and the funeral is broadcast all over the national news. Election day comes and goes. The president defeats his rival Senator John Neal, played by Craig T. Nelson, in an uncredited cameo, and is thus reelected president. As Motz and Breen celebrate their victory for a job well done, they watch a TV broadcast about the president's reelection campaign. Everything seems fine until Motz sees that the media are crediting the president's election win to his tired "Don't change horses in midstream" campaign slogan, rather than Motz's elaborate plans. Motz announces that he will call the media to set them straight, despite Breen's warning him that he is toying with his life. When Motz refuses to back down and walks out wanting to take the credit for the president's successful reelection, Breen very reluctantly orders, without speaking a word, to a nearby Secret Service agent to do what they have to do. Motts is seen being taken away by several agents to a waiting car. The next morning, there is a voice-over news reported about Motts being found dead in his Hollywood home from an apparent heart attack, strongly implying that Bream and Ames and their associates had Motts killed and covered it up to prevent them from taking to the press about the truth of the fabricated war. Bream nevertheless goes to attend Moss's funeral anyway. An iconic tragicomedy ending movie ends with another news report about a violent incident in Albania by a local terrorist group. It is unclear whether this is a true event and that is very real war between the USA and Albania has started, or simply a continuation of the fictional war. So there we have it. That's the start here for the movie review. And let's go to Kevin now to fill us in with our comments here. Go ahead, Kevin.
From the very start of the movie, we are introduced to the massive impact and influence the media plays in shaping human perceptions. Perception of a situation always is more important than its actuality when it comes to controlling and steering the overall human experience. For any one thing can be perceived many different ways, especially when preconceived ideas and considerations come to bear. So, how do you ensure the outcome you want as a controller? You first present the surface, the appearance of the one-dimensional arena and all that transpires within it. The perception, then, of the human experience overall that is generally contrary to what's really taking place. And if you successfully have the masses perceiving the world in a way that you want, so then will you glean agreement, and can steer that agreement, can direct and channel it, that you can shape and mould human experience in a way that suits you. The controllers already have agreement to their control over humanity, for as with a simulated creation, what is experienced individually or collectively can only be so if it is decided. We decide our consciousness, our simulator producing mechanics, based on the ideas we place within it, a movie reel of our own specific devising, then we experience the effects. And so, should a controller wish to be featuring in our movie, they have to have our permission to include them in it, to be added as an idea agreement to our consciousness, and there they will be. And any idea file agreed to is an incorporation of everything that idea comprises of. For an idea is never simply what it appears on the surface, but a whole conglomeration of affiliated ideas, that even if we don't see these, are not aware of them, we still accept and take them on. Agreement to what on the surface seems an individual that boasts the promise of a benefit may come with more than we bargained for, especially if they harbour ill-intended, controlling agendas. So ultimately, this is how humanity finds itself in a controlled situation. Agreements were made with the collective human species to the accepting of being controlled, and so the species experiences that which it has in fact decided to, as nothing is by accident or chance. Agreements then become subconscious and into the dimensional parts of the self that are unseen as lifetimes roll on. For each lifetime heralds a new mental body vehicle, the storage area for experience references of each lifetime, but that doesn't include previous lifetimes of experience. Anything prior to our current lifetime, and that data is rather transferred to the akashic causal aspect of the self, part of the unseen part of the personal self, and generally that which most are unconscious, unaware of, and can't access. But all lifetimes of these agreement ideas still remain, regardless of what aspect of the personal self they reside within. As it is the overall consciousness in its entirety which is the generator of our experiences, and so we experience in accordance to its programming, and overall, through agreement, mostly subconscious, we have humanity in a perpetual state of decided enslavement. Even with the agreement to control locked in, as it were, subconsciously embedded, the controllers need it maintained. For yes, people will consciously rebel against their slave masters, and we see this generally being expressed more so in recent times as the control system becomes so apparent. And although, due to the subconscious agreements, the controllers still have humanity locked into their controlled matrix, extrication from a controlled situation starts with a conscious recognition of it. It must begin on the surface, the one-dimensional physical level. For even as clever as the controllers are with their managing of the surface front, as their control increases, so does it become more blatant, and a conscious acknowledgement and awareness of the control the human experience is based on will become more so with the masses. Hence the necessity for escalating control, and through technology, the 5G, the eventual robotization agendas, etc. For as the overall mass awakening of the humans as to their predicament begins on the densest level of creation, the physical, awareness always seeks to be more so than what it is, and should things progress, the controllers have the potential situation of losing agreement not only consciously, but should, say, the awareness of humanity become more so, awareness of the unseen parts of the created self, and the simulation, and even beyond, into the real awareness that animates and is through all creation and the simulated body forms, then this represents agreement retraction from the controllers, agreement that maintains their positions, and an overall simulation based on their design, an overall simulation that can only be as they desire if overall the consciousness that affects it agrees with the ideas the controllers have created as to its design. But in the meantime, perception still is a key element, and the control system, as extensive as it is, and it is through all the systems, will ensure the masses perceive the world in such a way that suits the controllers and maintains humanity's enslavement. For it is perception that dictates action and behavior, and if everyone can be marketed into thinking the world is fine, then nothing will be done to change or challenge something that from the perceptions of those successfully marketed doesn't require rectifying.
Okay, good. Peter, do you have anything? Any comments on that part?
This is Peter Pan. But listen, my computer has been taken over, and I wanted this person. He's by gunpoint. He's pointing the gun right at my head. He says, "You got to do this." So I'm gonna let this. My computer skills have been. I'm very uptight. He's got the gun at my head. He's telling me we got to do this, or we're gonna lose the elections, and we're not gonna get the word out. And it's all this stuff. Let me get this word out right now. Here we go. I'm hitting the button, but it's not going. I'm getting really nervous now. You know, we're going to lose the election, and we got to make up something false and fake in order for the people to listen to us instead of listening to the real news. And then that's what happened, you know. He was having an affair, and they said, I got to go and make a war over in Albania, somewhere in Europe. And then nobody going to get in our way. We're going to win the election because we're getting them to think about other things. And, you know, it's really easy to fake the people out, you know?
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, control their perception through their own agreement. And then you got them, you know, you got their reality in your hands. And we just see this, like terms like confirmation bias, where, you know, you're just going to see things the way you see things, even though you're presented with the facts. Even physically see things that are going on, you see them a different way. It reminds me of this old KGB guy that's on Facebook. You see him talking about that, about the what they did to brainwash people, or to the Soviet Union did, or talk about just in general how the same thing, confirmation bias, or how you can show somebody the facts, but if they have agreed to with themselves that it isn't so, or they have a different viewpoint, they're just going to go with their own viewpoint. Cognitive dissonance, Manchurian Candidate. I mean, it's all very interesting how these things, how our perceptions change with, or distorted with our own agreement and agreement to other people's, you know, control factors. Yeah, and we see this with the COVID and with the all the staged events, the shootings, and all the staged, all the crisis actors. By the way, there's room, you know, there's employment to be had if you want to be a crisis actor and play in one of these stage scenarios. They're really doing this all over. They're just it's going on every day. This staging of events, and this movie is very good in terms of showing us that. I mean, it's just blatantly obvious how things are being set up for the public to see things a certain way, the way they want to see it. Okay, Kevin.
As for preconceived notions and considerations regarding ideas, these can be very much created also by the controllers, as they mould the consciousness of humanity into its likes, dislikes, its morals, what is acceptable, what isn't. They play the long game and prepare the consciousness of humanity in such a way that when they roll out their scenarios and marketed surface ideas and situations, they would have already fashioned the consciousness in such a way that when humanity is presented with a certain idea, reaction overall can be predicted, as people are triggered emotionally, positively or negatively, according to the ideas associated with an idea that has been ingrained into the consciousness. If you can market certain colours as representing certain ideas, for example, be they good or bad, then to steer agreement, you simply need present these colours in association with the idea you want agreement for or against. And although consciously not realised, subconsciously will such details and subtleties trigger reaction and can swing agreement on a mass scale. An easy example would be how green is associated with go, or to proceed, and red is more the opposite. And so in recent times, the television is the main source of consciousness moulding, to bombard the consciousness through subliminals, and to present a world that is generally far from reality. For as we could see in the movie, the technology now so advanced that any image could be changed, doctored, altered, edited, cut, spliced. Again, it's all about perception, and so all the mainstream media is controlled, with the illusion that they are operating independently and reporting sincerely without bias on what's taking place in the world. In reality, they are fed their stories, they are supplied their scripts, they are provided the doctored and edited footage to back up whatever version of events the controllers wish to unveil, and anything that doesn't suit the controllers, anything that would upset their gradual rollout of the continued restriction and control of humanity, will never be permitted to feature on the television screens. And when it comes to politics, the public perception is of the illusion of opposing parties, the fabricated and marketed front of choice, whereas in reality all parties are owned and controlled by the same overall controlling force. and so regardless of who you vote for, the same overall dark force cabal retains their control of humanity, and as a people vote then, as they vote for basically the same entity, so this is a tantamount to agreement for their continued, controlled experience. And as it has been said, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always gets in, and the politicians are here today, gone tomorrow, front men and women for the dark controllers that are behind the scenes, which would be the reptilians, as the main species that has control of humanity, and indeed the entire simulator. And the Robert De Niro character, Bream, would invent and create crises of various kinds to garner and swing agreement that favoured him, although the movie did portray as though the political parties were in opposition of each other, whereas in reality they are not. But you'd have to have reached a certain position in the controlling system to realise this. It's likely most bottom-rung politicians, although budding controllers in their own right, may not fully realise there is in reality no opposing political parties, at least among the main ones, with generally most countries having 2 or 3 controller-managed main parties. So we had Bream, in fact, engineering wars that facilitated agreement to be steered in a certain direction, and indeed the perceptions of the causes and reasons for these wars must be managed, to then have agreement for the justification of invasion, of takeovers, of plundering resources, and the consolidation of power across the globe. That can only be so if through wars and the management of the aftermath that all invaded countries then be drawn into a globalistic model, a superstate, a one world order that has all decision-making centralised in the hands of the few. That agreement, and therefore overall consciousness, be completely managed through every country and culture. For to have more and more control overall, you must have more so control over every individual and every country's collective consciousness. And as you micromanage the consciousness of every being on the planet, so can you effect more precisely the exact overall shared simulation you seek to implement, without any variables that are uncontrolled due to countries, cultures, and people that are agreeing to and effecting then different experience into the mix. So usually the idea that is marketed to justify war is of terrorism, and this was very much mentioned in the movie, how the presence of terrorists in countries demanded invasion, that the people be saved from the terrorists, so-called terrorists, which are generally funded, armed and trained by the very takeover countries that are declaring the necessity of war based on these terrorists. Terrorists that had in fact been created and deployed from the very countries that are invading to keep the civilians of said country safe. Then the country is invaded, its unique and decided to culture destroyed. Then it is absorbed into the overall social consciousness, a consciousness managed, steered, and designed by the controllers to effect their desired overall simulation, with no additional variables, ideas, and agreements that are not by the controller's design. Everything, every agreement and idea, then micro-managed.
Okay, while Peter gets ready,
I'm here.
go ahead.
I was going to make a exciting rebirth of the Tweety Bird comment number 2, but without the backup. But I couldn't quite get it in time. Here you are. And I just want to say about that terrorism, that the idea that's presented in '96 when this movie was made, 3 or 4 years later, we had the, well, actually 3 years later, we had one of the most dramatic examples of that we've ever had in history, maybe the most dramatic, 9/11. And they had this on the media of every single person in the entire world paying attention. And oh, poor America had 2,000, 3,000 people, and they actually reported 6 or 7, 8, 9, 10,000 people dead, which turned out to be an exaggeration. And the fact was, they had already set this up. There's another movie called The Real American, I think it's called. It was made and put out in about the time of 1999 was what it was talking about, and 2000. They had for about 15 years been developing the software to identify dangerous advances of taking over the computers and using the phones to create terrorism in the United States. So this was a government project. The Good Americans in the movie, the Good American was a group of software engineers that were working on the project that would eventually become the Patriot Act's initiation of watching all the phone and information services exchanges worldwide. But the problem was they had originally, the good people had made this program in order to really protect Americans. And this was a government project. But in 1999, 2000, they decided they would get rid of or fire or put them off the project, this group of people that were making sure that it didn't invade Americans' privacies. And the truth was, they got rid of them because they rewrote the program and they made sure that actually the foreign invasion or terrorism was going to access and be able to do what it wanted to do. And what they were doing was implementing this as a form of the Patriot Act to watch every American. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what happened. The real terrorism was by the governments. by the FBI, CIA, whoever, whichever, this organization. It's an excellent movie, The Good American.
Mhm.
It's really more of a documentary. And the people that were hired were fired and or retired from their CIA, or I don't think it was CIA, it was the other organization, forgot the name. Did they mention any organizations in Wag the Dog?
Yeah, the CIA. William Macy was a CIA agent that came to De Niro to tell him, to tell him this is fake. It's a fake war. We have our assets in the field. There's no war out there. And De Niro says, "What do you mean there's no war? We saw it on TV."
Right.
So
So same thing, and it's amazing, So 3 years after this, they actually implemented, and I see this with many movies. They come out with this stuff, and the next thing you know, it's being implemented at a much larger scale in all kinds of Robert Redfords and Watergates and all these past movies that they made. Politicians, Dustin Hoffman. The Hollywood people are very active in actually assisting the projects and terror or government media manipulation relationships. And now it's, then they did, what do they call that? Money Madness. There's a new one out, a TV show that was on for about 10 years about the advertising industry. It was very, very popular. It was #1 show. I didn't watch it, but Money Madness or something like that, about crazy media people who do anything for the dollar. But, they had no ethics really concerning what they were allowing to be produced and presented to the public. And that's the main issue. That's so Waggy the Dog, 10 times over 9/11, and now COVID. And they did the same thing in Florida, by the way, with the storms. They used the media to get all the people in Florida to drive away from the hurricane and drive north one year, about 5 to 10 years ago. And everybody did. I'm looking at the news and going, I see where it's going to go. It's not that dangerous. And they got almost, half the state on the road. And it was really a test market situation. Yeah, let's see how far we can go with getting all the people to follow what we're going to say and do. That's it. That's it, boy. Spin doctoring, A++. Thank you, Val.
thanks. Yeah, it's a term now. The president's wagging the dog. Bush did it. Trump, he did it. The Monica Lewinsky scandal with Clinton that just happened after this movie. They wagged the dog by going into Iraq or wherever, Sudan, wherever he was bombing, to distract his situation there with her because of his impeachment, So it's just a term now, wag the dog. But I want to go off a little bit here saying that it's interesting how the more we get away from the natural environment, the more we can distort people's perception. We use the environment, the sun, trees, nature as something real. It is real in its own sense in this reality. It's not the absolute real, but it's real here, in terms of like it's self-sufficient, it takes care of itself, it doesn't harm. Basically, it's neutral. But the more you get away from it, the more you can distort people's perceptions. And we see Fact Finder now, that's on Facebook, like, okay, they're controlling the narrative because science is all bought off. So they can control all these things that in the past people say, well, this is, science, based on science. Well, now science can be distorted too. because science is moving away from nature. It looks like it's working with it or trying to understand it, but in reality, no, they're distorting it by doing all these Frankenstein's experiments and distorting nature through GMOs, etc. So what we're doing here with the new presentation is like basing, you know, helping people see what's really going on, first of all, but basing something off of what is, you know, instead of an opinion. You see Facebook with all, you know, it encourages people to do likes or dislikes. So they like that. They like people with opinions. And you can become popular through the media with your, you know, popularize yourself through, if you're through, you know, through the media, you can become popular. But basically, everything is an opinion. You know, politics is an opinion now. Democrat, Republican. Oh, I like this. I like that. But all these things are just basically human likes and dislikes. It's not based on anything real. Nature is real in this reality. So, and I'll just give you a little surprise here. We're going to be working with Sheriff Mack, who's basing his, Sheriff Mack is a former sheriff of Arizona, and he's a constitutionalist, but he's basing his movement on the Constitution, which is like a reality in a sense. I mean, there's an agreement there by most Americans that the Constitution, we base our democracy, etc., on our Constitution. So he's basing his movement on something like an agreement that's real, you know, that it's agreed upon. It's not an opinion. So this is very interesting because what's happening now in the world is not based on the Constitution, with all the tyranny that the federal government is imposing on people with the masks and the vaccines. It's not based on the Constitution. And there are people out there that are, you know, resisting and not complying, but they're really not getting much attention, and they don't care. The feds don't care. But Sheriff Mack has some media. I mean, he has some followers. So let's see where this goes, because he's part of the system, but yet he's not complying with the system because he has it in he's done his research on the Constitution, and it's nowhere, you know, he has in his area, in his counties or wherever the sheriffs have been elected by the people, he has dominion over the feds. His priority, he has rights to not be bothered and interfered with by the feds. So he's basing his stuff, his movement on something real. So that's what I'm trying to say, is like something. It's not real and absolute, but it's agreed upon by the people in America. The Constitution, we play off this Constitution, but it's not going that way. The feds aren't complying to the Constitution, but he is, so we'll see where it goes. And that's why I say with nature too, nature is something we can base or play off of that's real in this arena. But people are so much being moved away from any kind of reality into this virtual reality, and it's easy to control people's perceptions that way. The more you go away from reality, the more easy it is to control people. So now it's a standard to be weird, you know. Now it's a standard to be distorted, to wear a mask, and to wear. You see where it's going. It's just a standard. They're moving people into a standardized view of reality where it's like totally foreign to nature itself. You know, this movie is a great example of how that can be implemented. Okay, so Kevin?
And we have the sexual scandals, again, made mention of in the movie. Anything that the controllers don't want to be revealed will never, in fact, feature on the TV screens, despite the supposed leaked footage and apparently overheard conversations. Everything is very watertight and extremely managed, and indeed, every politician of any kind of standing, significance, or influence will have been compromised in some way. The general means of doing so is to have the political individuals filmed while in the company of young children in sordid situations. And so, despite most controlling types and politicians content with their positions of control and content to toe the controller line, these are additional assurances that maintain loyalty, and if necessary, a bullet is just as effective if a political character is moving beyond the parameters of the controller's dictates as to their function. And we saw how, in the movie, it was indeed the expertise of movie producers and filmmakers that are instrumental in garnering agreement through the imagery and TV they produce. They create the stories. They produce the footage. With their green screen technologies, they can effectively have anyone seemingly standing in any geographical location. As in the movie, they had the American girl posing as Albanian, and the studio she would be running through was overlaid with the appropriate Albanian landscape, a war-torn region, over a bridge, and with her holding a kitten that was, until the footage was altered, a bag of potato chips. Again, a play on emotions, on psychology, as they would utilize ideas that would cause certain emotional reaction. A dog would never do. An older cat wouldn't be quite cute enough, but a kitten more guaranteed to pull on emotional strings. As the personal self is very emotionally based and driven, everything for the personal self is sensation based, regardless of the sensation of the emotion. If an idea can be laced with emotion, so the idea holds more appeal, even if the emotion is anger or rage. The personal self delights in its sensations through the astral body, and as with the design of the personal self, everything generated through them produces effects. This includes the emotions, and indeed, if we enhance or charge a literal mental idea with emotion, it makes it far stronger an agreement, a more embedded tap line. And so, for a controller, ideally, they would want to present their literal mental ideas for agreement, and agreement can also be trawled through focus and attention, another reason for their incessant bombarding of created ideas and scenarios, regardless of what they are. If the controllers created them and the masses focus on them, then the masses are locked into agreement with the controllers, and with the control then that they represent, that then becomes the agreeable masses' simulated experience. And so presented are their ideas, their creations, and ideally to be of such a design that emotional reaction can be excited, and thus they have their emotionally charged mass agreement from humanity. And with any engineered war or created adverse situation will be the expected reaction of fear, and as the personal self always seeks comfort and safety, so will it seek to have this fear alleviated. And as the controllers covertly create the situations that have caused the decided reaction of fear, the terrorists, the COVID pandemics, so will they then present their solutions to that which they had in fact created. And the agreeable masses, wishing the fear removed, then agree with solutions that generally represent more control and restriction, and the agenda of continued escalation of restriction of the human experience moves along. Problem, reaction, solution, as David Icke would say.
What I'm trying to figure out about this is the use of terrorism itself is almost natural, and that I mean it has to do with taking advantage of any situation which is a survival motivation. They use what I call reptilian law, and that's the constitutional law in its most severe interpretation, where they say we have to rule by law to protect the people, we have to rule by law in order to protect the environment, and this is our power. We're empowered to do this by the Constitution. This is actually only an interpretation of the Constitution. So I'm just quickly going to say that what happens is, you see, if you look at the Constitution from one point of view, you can see what they were trying to say in the most humanitarian and altruistic way. But really, because it was written by the bankers and the lawyers and the politicians who were making the decisions, that it actually is a document of presentation of control that is manipulated. So as one clear example, the slavery amendment was supposed to free the slaves, but what it did to was institutionalize the slaves and make them part of the institution under their control. And it's really convoluted because it's so inherently interpreted as a mechanism of humanitarian or political freedom and purpose, good purpose, whereas it's not true. Yes, Val.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about opinions. It's actually the Constitution is like very, very direct, and it does not really open to interpretation. They just think they have these Supreme Court judges and all this stuff going on where they're supposed to be interpreting something that's just actually very simple. If you read it, if you study it, it's very direct. There's no interpretation needed. It's not like the Bible or something where, it's allegorical or something. It's very direct. So they want you to have this opinionated kind of view of it. Well, it can be interpreted, but it's very direct in terms of the freedom in the civil, especially the civil rights section, the Bill of Rights, where it provides, provides the freedom for people to gather, to, free speech and all that. It's very, very direct, but they want you to have this view that it can be, and they are the ones that interpret it, that it was,
Yes.
So it's, again, perception and laziness by the people, like, oh, well, we need the executive branch to interpret it for us. We need lawyers, and, that gets into a whole lot of funny business.
Now, let me just say about this, that the interpretations that we're allowed to have are of two kinds, and there's always a polarity of 2 points of view: Republicans, Democrats, legal practitioners in the Supreme Court, or the money men and the people who are supposed to be watching over the money supply. That would be the brokers versus the bankers, let's say. And the interpretations of, or the polarity, this is the same choice that we get, which they called the lesser of two evils when Clinton was running against Trump. Let's vote for the lesser of two evils. That's the choice that we're given, or that people are given. They're not given the real choice, which is actually, I'll call it a third thing, which is a whole choice. And it's not an oppositional conflict polarity between sides. And that's where it really is. And none of these systems or their interpretive collusions, one side or the other, has any real meaning, because it's not including the whole, the all is, the natural environment, the real people, and the outside of their systems. And that's I guess the comment I was talking about. Wag the Dog. One thing I'll just mention to finish is the characters, in the politicians. They went into his, he was having an affair, but they never talked much about their real positions politically, how they got elected, what they were. They gave their media positions, but what we're talking about was they never went into their real background. And the same thing goes for like the actors who play all these roles in these movies. Like Dustin Hoffman has a long history, right? I mentioned this earlier. And De Niro, they're representations of the Italians and the Jewish, which are the primary populations in New York, where the money is and the major political forces. And these actors are actually representatives of these two viewpoints, let's say, or the whole Judeo-Christian viewpoint. Therefore, any other viewpoint, far be it for Islam, Muslim, or a Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, to have a say in terms of what's real in these human political spheres, etc. It's the same thing, let's make sure everybody only thinks there's two choices. There is no other choice. You can't vote for the Green Party. Certainly not going to vote for George Soros and the Mexican.
You're wasting your vote. You're throwing away your vote with third party, So
that's it. I just go ahead. I'm
thanks.
done.
Yeah, they're playing off the polarity thing. They create good and evil by this polarity that we have here. but they're creating these ideas of good and evil, and they're playing off of them, and they're, you know, they're really like using them for their own, you know, means, agenda. But in a way, they're just neutral. I mean, the polarity thing is just neutral. It's just cause and effect, and that's just automatic. But they're bringing in moral, social mores, things like that to kind of, this is wrong, this is right. And again, it's just a control factor, whereas really the birds don't have this kind of idea. Nature really doesn't have this idea. There's cause and effect, but there's not any of these ideas thrown into it. And then you mentioned, yeah, I wonder where Mel Gibson's coming out, you know, with this, supposedly with this new movie on the Rothschilds. He plays one of the Rothschilds trying to get his inheritance, trying to get to his inheritance. So where do you see him as representing as an actor? I don't know his background, but he's played in, remember he was Jerry in Conspiracy Theory, that movie, and he played, you know, developed that or directed that one on Jesus. And where do you see him in terms of like representing?
I go with Jewish for one thing.
Is he Jewish? Okay.
Absolutely. I
Okay.
think so. And if he's not, he might as well be now, because he's looking more and more Jewish every day. Anyway, I'm not going to go into conspiracy about Jews, except for to say there are a number of them that are very short and small, so to speak. On the big screen, generally, big guys play better. I mean, little guys play better. It's easier to see them, get them on the screen. And so there are a whole bunch of actors that are short. And Mel Gibson's not a big guy at all. And you look at how I thought he was a big guy, Lethal Weapon, you know, yeah, he's real strong, athletic. And then I find out he's not really very big, and etc. But he's from Australia.
Yeah.
So we also have to go with the English, the Queen, and that's a whole nother conspiracy group, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then there's Pope is Italiano, De Niro, represents the Pope,
Mm-hmm.
and the Catholic. We call them cataholics.
Mm-hmm.
Here we got a bunch of cats. You do too. We got cataholics here, Catholics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a whole conspiracy of control going on here all the time, you know. And it's funny because we all represent that, us as people. We all have representations. And we have 4 cats that are with there's only 3 people, but all of the cats have this representations with each of us. And it's rather curious, you know, to watch that. It's life in the mirror and in the, you know, I call it the mirror, and you called it the whole sphere that we're in.
The Matrix? What?
Later.
The arena? I mean the it's a place, like the place.
Manipulator.
The simulation, the simulator.
Later. Shoot. Thank you, Kevin. Gee, Willikers.
And we were talking about Sheriff Mack. He just Dwayne just started a group. I think Sheriff Mack and the Constitution. And Dwayne said, Peter, you might be interested in this too, to pursuing this. You have some understanding about this, but we're going to be moving along these lines, utilizing him and what he's doing, not as an absolute, and not that we're agreeing to anything, but we're just utilizing how he's marketing, you know, freedom. It's implied.
You're gonna walk on his thread.
Yeah. Just like, you know, we use anything, a car, tool, hammer or something, but you know, we can, he's gotten his foot in the door here in terms of like with something real that's really could go someplace with helping people to benefit people. So you'd be part of this too, Peter, in some way. So look it up, Facebook group, Sheriff Mack and the Constitution. There's at least 4 Facebook groups made today. But I don't want
I'm
to.
also going to go with Eric Clapton and Van Morrison have band together to start doing this music project, whatever it is. This has got to stop. Is the song he put out, and that's a thread too. This of the artists and all the Hollywood actors included. A lot of them are probably in line with this. They don't want to be told they have to take a vaccine. They don't want to be told that kept under this control, and they recognize it most readily. We learned that back in 1970. And a lot of the people, what they did was they went off grid. John Lennon quit. Eric Clapton quit. But unfortunately, all they did was go and take drugs and, like that. A lot of them did that. And everybody, or they went and moved to the country, the whole group of them. There's a whole group, everybody. The whole thing went up to 1970, 71, and then it stopped. And then the war stopped. And Nixon, Watergate, but all the revolution stuff went kind of private and isolated. The people just got off the politics thing or the revolution thing. That's what happened back then. And it's kind of coming back around now.
Well, let's go on. That's good, Peter. Thank you. Let's go on, Kevin, to the last part.
And as was made very apparent in the movie, as it is in actuality, how those we see as the victims, the downtrodden, the individuals whose woes demand that something be done, are as fabricated very often when appearing on the TV screens, as most of which the controllers present us with, as a surface marketed front that is far from the reality of what is actually so, as the controllers pull on the emotions through the doctored, altered imagery they churn out, and a term that has been used for these actors and volunteers, paid or otherwise, are crisis actors. They play their roles, just as any actor might, to produce and deliver a certain perception of events that will have the vast majority in agreement to the controllers. As the controllers continue to manage the consciousness through the agreements they secure. For yes, they have moulded the social consciousness into the accepted likes, dislikes, rights and wrongs. Then they play on these idea agreement considerations and constructs through psychological manipulation ploys, through what they present on the televisions with their managed scenery, film sets, and crisis actors. The media, of course, generally clueless, and any hint of insurrection, and they won't be sat in the news chairs for long. They are fed their stories like movie scripts, and read them off unquestionably. And even the cue cards provided for the politicians in the movie, as it is in actuality, would prompt them when to pause, and even when to clear their throat, to make for a more relatable and better received delivery. And even the weather would elicit certain reaction according to the type of weather that it is, everything being psychological, and the psychology of the consciousness of humanity very much created by the controllers also, so they certainly know how to work with the psychology that is by their design. Have the president meet the Albanian child in the rain, etc., as it was in the movie, and if it wasn't raining, find a location where it was, and even to the extent that I imagine they would even manipulate the weather if it achieved the outcome they wanted, for their media programming methods, as they certainly have the technology to manage the weather or create it, and the movie would present the illusion that not only were the political parties in opposition, and thus represented the illusion of choice, but that the various spaghetti agencies, the CIA, in the case of this movie, had the best interests of the country at heart, as they sought to reveal how the war that was supposedly in effect was in fact not, but in reality the control is absolute, and through all systems, including the military and various agencies such as the NSA, CIA, FBI, etc., but as it is rather a tiered control system, only those reaching a certain level of it will be aware that it is the same controlling force that works through all the systems of governments, politics, military, and only on the surface does it appear there is differences in interests and seeming opposition. And we had the example in the film of a presented war hero left behind in the country that was the target for invasion, to elicit sympathy and emotional reaction, and thus agreement to war and invasion, as they would bring in the various emotionally triggering ideas of everything from the supposed war hero sending a coded message to his mother, to building up the idea theme of the old shoe, a play on the surname of the supposed war hero, and the promotion of this old shoe idea, coupled with a song that was swiftly created in a studio and marketed to be an old song that fit perfectly the situation they were presenting the public with. But in fact, the soldier in the movie was a convict, a rapist, released temporarily for this function, and so, through cultivating association of one idea representing another, could the shoe be then a symbol of the plight of this supposed soldier and the disdain for the country that supposedly contained him, and like anything symbolic, this can become ingrained in the consciousness. It will then become subconscious over lifetimes, but the symbol of a single shoe could elicit the same emotional reaction, despite the individual who reacted to it not recognizing or aware of why they would react in ways that they do to what is a symbol that on the surface has no apparent significance. And so these symbols, with their emotionally applied charge, become a part of the consciousness and can be used at any time to generate reaction, response, and agreement, such as the symbols used by the cabal today. Their exact meaning and origins, perhaps long lost in antiquity, but still have a powerful effect on the consciousness, as they once were associated with something that was consciously acknowledged, accepted, and agreed upon, but then became subconsciously housed, forgotten, but still effective as a subliminal therefore, as most would not consciously consider the various curious cabal symbols that are utilized in the world today. And as it is in reality, if you work with the controllers, you rather are operating in a dangerous territory, for if you outlive your usefulness, or if you decide to go against the overall dictates of the dark forces, you will be threatened, compromised, or killed. And it was so with the Dustin Hoffman character, Mott's, as the main producer of all the film imagery and psychological ploy, for he chose to buck the controller's demand for silence and secrecy as to their marketed manipulations of perception, and it was revealed how Mott's then suffered a heart attack. The last we would see of him would be the Dark Force militia escorting him away, but we can be assured it was rather an induced death. But the public masses, getting their information from the controlled mainstream medias, would never learn of the real reasons behind Mott's death.
I was just looking up Stanley Kubrick. Of course, Dustin Hoffman's first name is Stanley here in the movie. How did, do you know how Stanley Kubrick died? Because he was, he staged the moon landing and all that. So, do you know anything about him? Just curious.
Well, I don't know how he died, but I'm sure it will look very natural on the surface. But according to his daughter, she proclaims adamantly to this day that he was murdered. It's very similar to a lot of these actors who go against the dictates of what the controllers allow them to speak out, or as to their function. A little like the Prince, the musician who started speaking, I think, in regards to vaccinations and such, and he would be, and I think he even went on the Richie Allen show, which was a show that was based in the UK, where they spoke of all things that was really happening in the world. It was affiliated with David Icke and such. And when he went on that show, Prince, I think, literally a couple of weeks later, he suddenly had an apparently natural illness and died. And the same with Williams, the actor. He was found hanged, and it was claimed he was depressed, and yet all his friends and associates would say that wasn't the case. But again, he was speaking of things that he was not allowed to make mention of publicly, and that was the result. So this is a common theme. Again, with all these actors, you can't be in any of the systems and be presented to the public in any way, these major Hollywood actors and such, unless you are affiliated and part of the control systems. And so once you've pitched in with them, you got to play by their dictates. And if you step out of line, they will execute you, because as you agree to them, you also are almost taking that as an agreement contract that they can kill you at any time. And so that is generally the case. And as you said, it was the case with Stanley Kubrick with his last movie, Eyes Wide Shut, I think it was, where he was speaking, where he was portraying in the film a lot of detail about the secret satanic societies and how they operate throughout the systems of the world. And obviously he revealed a little too much in that the controllers were comfortable with, and consequently he was executed. But as I understand it, he did have a fair amount of rope to play with, because almost, I think they had a deal with him that if he produced the faked moon landing footage that they would then use, that he would then have leeway to present a lot of the controller's material in his movies, which would make for good movie material. And so he was given a bit more leeway than most, but again, he stepped a little too far, and that was the consequence. He was a very clever individual. A lot of the information he was putting out was very symbolic and not very apparent. There was a lot of stuff in the Stephen King's The Shining, the original movie, where he was incorporating a lot of imagery in that, which was indicative, which was indicating that the moon landings were fake. And again, people have painstakingly gone through a lot of his work and movies to pick out these features. But what happened was, what was very subtle became a bit too blatant, and then that's why he was executed for his efforts. And so, yeah, I don't know exactly what he died of. I mean, it's just a case of researching it, I suppose. But whatever it is, they die of a heart attack. Is the general thing that they present, or a suicide, and so on and so forth. But again, as a lot of people have said, the whistleblowers, they have the ability to induce heart attacks and any sort of condition or ailment they want. And so even if it was an actual heart attack, it's very possible he could have been targeted with some sort of energy weapon which caused his heart to cease functioning. Of course, with everything being frequencies and such, all you've got to do is to know the exact frequency of whatever organ you want to target, and then if you bombard it with disharmonious frequencies, then it's obviously going to cause disruption of it, and so you can have your heart attacks. So yes.
Yes. Yeah, we had an arts. We were doing some marketing the new presentation in the Marin County in California, and that's where Robin Williams lived, or had one of his houses up there in Marin County, which is like north of Golden Gate Bridge, north of San Francisco. And afterwards, I went to this cafe, which he often visited, and some people knew him. He used to ride his bike a lot. He used to exercise a lot, ride up his bike up and down the hills in Marin County, and then he used to stop at the cafe. And he didn't really he had no indication he was going to commit suicide or he was in ill health or anything. But like you say, he was probably stepping out too far with what he was talking about. That's what happens. Kirsten Dunst in this movie too, she said, well, can I put it on my resume? And I said, no. Well, what will happen if I do? I'm gonna have to kill you. You know, the little smirk on his face, De Niro. Yeah, that's just protocol. You just keep to business. You know, keep focused on what you are told to do, and you'll be okay, at least for now, until your time is up, and then you're expendable. And I notice these movies like this is kind of a light-hearted, dark comedy kind of in a way. Comedies are usually like telling you the truth, and the dramas are like fake, as they say. There's a saying like that. Well, comedy is a way they can use to portray what's really going on in a way where your subconscious mind and your conscious mind don't really see it that way. They see it as entertainment, but actually, they're telling you what they're doing in a comedy. So, we've been using comedy lately too in our shows. Big Question Show, Jeopardy, Multidimensional Jeopardy. We use that to roll over Facebook with that. But we're using comedy as a way, another angle, just to see if anybody's waking up out there too. And there are people waking up, but we have the cure, what to do, after you wake up. What are you going to do about it? So we're not telling people what to do or anything. We're just provide guidance to what are your options. You have many options, and you're not limited or restricted as you are told. So that's where we come in.
And I was just going to briefly say, and another method they employ with all the actors that feature in the major movies and throughout Hollywood, probably more so in recent times, but they put probably, I would say, I would even imagine probably 100% of them in this day and age through very severe trauma-inducing mind control, probably when they're little children, and you can only imagine the sort of trauma that would involve. And so based on that, they then have complete control of them. And then the actors, as they get older and they're in all their movies and such, they will have the handlers that stand around them, and they can almost shut them down by holding up certain colours or certain symbols that if they happen to be perhaps going off on a tangent or speaking on live shows in ways the controllers would prefer that they wouldn't, they can literally be shut down. And I've seen quite a lot of videos where actors seem to be suddenly almost in a drunken stupor or unable to speak properly. And a lot of people would just assume and jokingly put in the comments, oh, it looks like this person's drunk or that person's had some whatever or drugs, but it's more, I suggest more along that case. So again, they very, very heavily manage the whole of Hollywood, and more so ensure that individuals will not sort of speak beyond the boundaries that they set. But as in the case of Robin Williams and other characters, if that fails to work, because again, with any sort of programming of the consciousness, because that is only a vehicle, you can step beyond and aside from it. And so these individuals, it would appear that's what they were doing. They were moving, they were positioning themselves outside of their very controlled consciousness. And so that then probably had them with the inclination to start speaking of things that they didn't. And so then I suppose then a bullet or hanging or a heart-induced heart attack is just as effective, though they would prefer not to use that because they are aware, because the controllers do know that people are cottoning onto this now. At the moment an actor speaks of things they shouldn't, a week later they're suddenly dead. I mean, it's very it's just not very subtle, and so they'd rather rely and depend upon their induced mind control techniques. But yeah, it's all very interesting. But as I said, every system on this earth at this time is completely controlled and coordinated and micro managed, and there won't be anybody that appears on the mainstream televisions, on the news, or any of the movies that are not controlled or compromised in some way. And if you're not, you won't get anywhere near the movie screen. So
Right. Well, thank you. That was Wag the Dog. And next week, Defending Your Life.
all right.
Have you seen that one?
I never heard of it. So
Oh, okay. With Meryl Streep and this other actor, I forget his name, but it's a fun one. He dies in a car crash and he goes to the other side, and it's all about that. So it's very well done. Okay.
NUUU.